What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Blade Dive. My name is Parker Bohan. I will be your host for the show. And if you're tuned in for the first time, thank you. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Follow us on social media as well at the Blade Dive on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And tag us in those photos with the hashtag the Blade Dive. All right, my guest today is JP Martin. And if you don't know JP is definitely somebody that describes himself as jack of all trades, master of none, which personally I think that's a pretty humble description of oneself. And that has a lot to do with his experiences in the snow industry as well as the lessons learned. JP has traveled the world as a pro snowboarder, but has also contributed to multiple resorts as an operator and a terrain park manager. I'm really excited for everybody to hear his stories about working on top of Donner Summit with the railroad clearing snow off the tracks, and there's some cool perspective overall in this episode. So if you're at home right now, go ahead and grab your favorite drink, kick your feet up, and if you're in the machine, you know what to do. Turn up the volume.
Go ahead and give it the juice. Already.
Okay, here we go. Another day, another episode of the Blade Dive. And my guest today, I'm super stoked to have on the show just because, one of the components that I hope we get into is an adventure that I'll let him introduce eventually. But JP Martin is my guest on the show. And I just want to say, JP, thanks for taking the time and welcome, man.
First of all, thanks for having me, man. I'm so stoked. And I just listened to Brandon Dodd's opening the show. I just hope everybody that's listening is sitting in their cats right now, because that is just the social media right now. Watching people like post windshields, sunsets, sunrises, and podcasts, that makes me stoked.
Yeah, it's actually been incredibly humbling to see people listening to the podcast in their machine and then sending messages, and just the stoke is real. So I never thought it would be this big a deal. You kind of start out with an embryonic idea, and so I'm super grateful for people sharing all the stuff, man, that they're doing in the machine while listening.
Totally. When I saw this pop up, I was like, oh my God, Parker. And I was thinking about the first and worst blade dive that I ever had that really shook me. I had a job on a logging site, and I had a BR 100 that had a top speed of 23 miles an hour. And I happened to hit a stump at full speed, full sticks. It killed the machine. And I was like literally like 8 miles out in the middle of nowhere.
Dude, that's a bit heavy. That's a deep blade dive for sure. Not only from the perspective of being in the middle of nowhere, but what you ran into. But look, man, I'm stoked you're on the show. Thanks for sharing that note real quick. I'm stoked you're on the show. So again, thanks for taking the time, and I think we jump into it. Let's do this, man.
Oh, dude, I'm so overwhelmed, kind of. I've done so many different things in a cat that I'm a jack of all trades, master of none, and that's kind of why I wanted to come on and talk about it, was because there are so many people that I look up to.
Yeah, and I think everybody's been that way that's come on the show so far. You've got your individuals that you've idolized or put on a pedestal, looked up to, however you want to frame it. It's just really cool to hear people share stories. So, but we're also talking about people's fuck-ups as well, their failures, their life lessons that they've taken away from this job. I mean, that's a big component of what we're discussing, too.
Yeah,
so.
If there's a way to mess it up, I've probably figured it out.
Yeah. That's good that you can just throw that out there. That's what I'm talking about. I really want to start with the beginning, too. I want to go chronologically with you as much as possible with all the good nuggets in between. But let's start from the beginning and really just draw up a picture of what it looked like to kind of grow up as JP Martin and share that story with everybody first.
Let's see. I like to tell people I was raised by wolves on the outskirts of Aspen, Colorado. And literally, my dad owned wolf hybrids. And I was bell to bell outside kid, I'd only come home because I had to eat, and my mom was worried about me. But like it was about being outside. I mean, when I was in second grade, I shortened my name to JP instead of John Paul Martin because I could get out to recess quicker, getting my cursive writing practice done faster. I was like finding the efficiencies.
That's awesome.
Shorten your name. I mean, how many people can do cursive now? I can't. Yeah, Aspen was an early adopter to snowboarding.
Yeah, I think that's important let's hit that real quick. So, if you're participating in the snow industry, maybe you're a transplant into the area, or the other side of the coin would be that you've always been there your whole life. And that's interesting to me because, from my perspective, outsider looking in, it was like, dude, like, gotta get there. Need to be there. Here's the location that I want to go to. But like I said, on the other side of that coin, it's an interesting story to kind of unwrap or go through each page of what maybe that person's life looks like growing up in that town, in that location, around that mountain. And you were in it. Like, you came up in an era that was really kind of like that golden age of the shred. And you were around Aspen, Highlands, Buttermilk, following around what I would have to assume would be some pretty legendary snowboarders at the time.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like I was an Aspenaut, and that was what they called the Aspenauts were the little ski kid groms. And I swear that we ruined the knees of most of our coaches with overshot landings on Buttermilk, because Buttermilk was kind of a park. It was a natural park mountain. It just had all those perfect rolls and flats that became such an amazing place to build a park. And 20 years, 25 years later, it was it was my babysitter.
Yeah, dude, that's so cool. But that perspective is what I'm talking about. From an outsider looking in, I'm going, my outlet's going to be something else because I'm growing up in a different part of the world, or the States rather, for me. But were you you said you were the bell to bell kid. Were you going, hey, mom and dad, peace out, I'm out, I'm going shredding? Or were you kind of around that ski team vibe and doing the team thing?
Kind of both. Like, my dad was a ski instructor in Aspen for 47 years, and he would have to go to work, so he would drop me at Buttermilk at like 7:30 in the morning, and he wouldn't pick me up till like 5:30 p.m. and I had to ingratiate myself not to get kicked out of the base lodge. And I mean, shout out to the Pelletier family, kind of a iconic family that would go out and build a Galunde jump over on the Taihack side, and they had 17 children. I remember it was like the Pelletier family was a ski family, and they lived downstairs in the restaurant at Taihack.
Very cool. Like, so pseudo family kind of sounds like you're exploring things through what they kind of have to offer, which is rad. Like, you got to find friends somehow, and you're in a close knit community. Is from what I gather, that's what you're describing. So, yeah, is that right? Like, was everything pretty tight knit there? Like, you had your crew, whether it was the family, whether it was the team, whether it was your dad and the ski instructor thing. Is that?
Well, one of my favorite nicknames of one of my buddies growing up was Trainwreck. This guy Nate Hansen, and we would always try and out jump the Galunde jump on Taihack, and it was like a 6 foot tall cheese wedge with probably 120 foot long landing, and Nate was famous for like landing at the bottom and falling out of his skis, like coming completely out of his skis and his poles, hat, goggles, gloves, and his skis going screaming towards the base lodge. I mean, it was just like, we had fun growing up, and it's what just gave me that wanderlust for life, really. I mean, it was just like the ski program was all about fun. It was all about jump runs. and none of it was built. So we were skiing in the trees, we were hitting natural rollers, and that just to me was like, okay, this is what skiing is, like, and then transition to snowboarding, and that mountain was insane for snowboarding.
It's cool to hear like your perspective of, because I've only spent a short period of time there, and from my experience, it was very much like kind of flowy snake runs through the park. How the park was laid out. I mean, I'm seeing it through the later year lens where all that stuff's been developed, and you've got stuff like the X Games there, and you're going through their regular offering for a terrain park, and I was stoked. I was like, holy shit, this is amazing! I can't even believe I'm here right now. But yeah, it sounds like you were in your groove, like you were doing your thing, you were developing a sense of who you were through your experiences of having some great friends and kind of figuring out like, damn, there's probably more that I could do with this, and I want to figure out what that is. But for right now and forever, I'm just going to continue to be me, be creative with the shred, and have fun with it. And you're doing your thing too, which is cool. Like you're being you. But I want to know too what maybe high school looked like for you, just to kind of draw a picture of that as well, because I'm always a comparison guy, and I definitely grew up in the South where people are just too polite for their own good, and it's almost fake. And what was high school like? Was it just like normal, or what? What was that normal?
No. It was like Beverly Hills High School. Kids would get Audis for their 16th birthday, and I was like the greasy farm kid from 10 miles down valley. And my parents worked really hard to provide for me to be a part of that lifestyle. It's like as you get older, you get more appreciation of what your parents have done. You might be like, oh, I don't have this and I don't have that, but when you realize it, like, holy shit, I just grew up in Beverly Hills, and uh, I got to experience it all, and I'm so thankful for the actual like Aspen experience.
Yeah. And I mean, like I said, I didn't spend that much time there, but that place is pretty magical. There are some cool things that you can get into there that would be really cool to be exposed to as a kid growing up. There's also some history there too. So
Oh, it's all like smoke and mirrors. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's a dirty fucking underbelly of Aspen that you're like, woo, like growing up and hearing about people being blown up in their cars by drug cartels because they turned state evidence to against the cocaine industry. It's just like, okay, I don't like that.
yeah, I mean, every town's got history though. You can't run from that. Every town's got history, but yeah, it sounds like you knew you were pretty just privileged, like you had an
No, I
opportunity.
was lucky as
Yeah.
shit. I was so lucky because I grew up with a job. I grew up working. Um, I got to travel in high school. I almost didn't graduate high school. I was actually forced out of high school.
Ooh, dude, that's deep. Let's hit that for a second. What was that all about?
Well, I was a ski racer, and I was gone like Thursday through Monday all winter long. And I was like junior Olympic level ski racer and raced all over the place. And a lot of the guys I went to race against ended up on the U.S. ski team, but I got super burnt out on it because the Aspen program just didn't. They stopped having fun, and for me, skiing was all about having fun, and that's why snowboarding came in. I think when I was like 13, somebody brought a Sims Lonnie Toff Pro Model snowboard to this middle school, and we had this huge sledding hill outside our middle school, and that's all I wanted to do was ride that plastic deck with a skateboard interface with a ski bolted underneath it to keep the nose from folding up, and like one bungee over your feet. And I was hooked. I was so hooked. I ended up building a snowboard in wood shop when I was 14. And the wood shop guy was totally cool with it. He's like, all right, we're going to have to put this thing in a press, and we don't really have a press. So let's go grab one of the railroad ties outside. And he cut the railroad tie on the bandsaw, and we put this piece of plywood in it, and we put all these pipe clamps on it, and took it and put it in the school nurse's bathtub. And for like 5 weeks, it was my job to go up to the school nurse's bathtub, which became a science experiment with a creosote railroad tie and a bunch of pipe clamps, and like tighten all the pipe clamps so that the nose got bent. And in the meanwhile, I was making like birdhouses and letter openers and all that crap. That
Yeah, well, for sure. But the stoke was real. I guess that's where my take is on it in your story there. Like you were just really creating what you wanted out of the materials that you had. Like that's straight up. That's what was.
well, I didn't know where to get a snowboard.
See, and that's
And
what.
all and
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That perspective of, because I literally came from, it's like you must build a birdhouse. This is what you must build. You cannot build that. And it's like, what the
yeah.
fuck? Like, why not? So yeah, man, like that's so awesome. But tell us how it came out. Did you write it? Did it? I mean, what happened there? I don't know. That's the other half of the story. I want to know what happened.
Dude, it was sick. I wrote it for about 10 minutes and it broke.
That's awesome. That's so good.
So I pinned it off the biggest rock and just like landed full lawn dart, and it snapped underneath my feet. And I don't even think I took it home. I think I threw it in the woods.
What a story, man. That's awesome.
I was so pissed.
Okay, well, real quick, like the airtime. What was the airtime like? Was it worth it?
Was airborne over the town of Aspen, just going ho ho ho. And then it just snapped underneath my feet.
Oh man, I've got my laughs in for the day. Oh man, what a story. One thing that we're really trying to we're attempting to kind of not get inside information, but just peel back the layers and just really let people know who these guests are that are coming on the show. One of the questions that's kind of become a bit of a staple is, JP, what's maybe one thing that defines you or is part of you that has nothing to do with the snow industry whatsoever?
Well, I don't know. To get personal, I'm fucking dyslexic as hell. I can't even spell that word. And ADHD, I guess, would come to mind. Like you just like in Aspen, I was fortunate to have a mentor. When I turned 15, I met this guy named Lou Dawson, who was the first like ski mountaineer to ski all of the Colorado 14ers. He wrote a book about it. And he took me under his wing, and we did all sorts of stuff. Like I built a racing mountain bike, and it was different from like having a stock bike. Like I had like road bike bars, but they were like touring bars. They were called Specialized Bull Moose handlebars. And I raced all over Colorado in the Norba series and ended up like second in the Norba Nationals in Durango. And there's no age groups. I was 15. Like I drove myself to Durango from Aspen in an old Toyota, 2-wheel drive Toyota Love or whatever it was, with no license plates and no insurance. It was like a 4-hour drive. I drove all the way down there to do that race. Like I was super into mountain biking. The guy that gave it to me said that if I got caught or pulled over by the police, he would just report it as stolen and take the insurance cash in. So he was all stoked. He was just like, dude, if you get busted, I win. If you bring it back to me, I'm glad you got to go to the race. He was one of the mechanics at the hub of Aspen bike shop. I pretty much defined me for a very, very, very long time. It was just big ego, huge, coming out of nowhere. I guess it was like small town kid, not like, and being like country kid, being a farm kid, farms and ranches, and wanting to like try and impress the kids who did get an Audi for their 15 and a half year old birthday. It was just like, yeah, I'm going to show you guys.
Do you think that's something that stuck with you for a while? That the way you carried yourself, whether you were trying to prove something or the way that you went about winning or losing, was that ego kind of in place for quite some time in your life?
No, I mean, it was just like this driving force that carried through my mid 30s of what we probably see in social media nowadays, like check me out, I'm ripping. And we didn't have that outlet. So it was like contests, it was travel, uh, and it was just how many tricks you could do, which back then was like Tindy Indy nose grab.
Right on. Yeah, I want to know too. Also, so you're there in Aspen and you're doing your thing. You're growing up. You got your childhood and you got your dreams that you're trying to chase after too. And so, as a kid, in a different era, different time, like you're just raising hell, doing whatever you want to do, doing your thing, and you've got like people around you that were maybe some influences, whether they were like childhood friends or pro athletes that you were looking up to, or like local legends, however that panned out. But like you were just in this area where I feel like, just like any other ski town that's that stereotypical, you would probably have some kind of buzz or just joy or passion towards trying to either board sport it or ski it or skateboard. What did that look like? Who were those people that you were around?
Well, like my early adopter buddies were like my two like skateboard buddies, right? So we would try and skateboard in the gravel of Aspen, and then um, snowboard because the Aspen High School had an open campus. So if you didn't have class, you didn't have to be there. And so my buddy Randy Metz and Matthew DeShooter, Randy's a lawyer now, and Matthew DeShooter is uh, a NICU anesthesiologist, so premature children. Like these guys, they far eclipsed what I feel like I've accomplished. But like these guys went on, and we were chasing early pros that were like Bob Klein was an early Burton Pro at Buttermilk, and then like Jeff Grell, the guy that claims like he's kind of an early claimer of inventing the high back for the snowboard binding, and Chris Carroll, who worked tirelessly to open snowboarding to resorts. Like those guys would write letters to the GMs and be like, "Hey, we have leash straps and we're trained to make left and right turns and stop on command, and please allow us to snowboard." And when Aspen opened, they actually had like a big Buttermilk. They chose Buttermilk. Aspen Mountain kind of stayed like Alta for a while, and they wouldn't allow snowboarding. But Buttermilk, they had this big opening, and they invited the school to come out, and they had Steve Link, who was the stunt double with Tom Sims in the James Bond movie. Where, yeah, so Steve Link shows up in his like Bogner one piece on a handmade board, and he was actually instrumental in making Joyride snowboards in Frisco back in the day, and that was like Dale Rayberg and all the like rad early Breckenridge riders, because Link was they had a press and they had an autoclave and they were like making snowboards in Frisco, and so when that happened, snowboarding was real. The GM of Aspen Ski Company, his daughter was my girlfriend, and she was a snowboarder. So she would go back to her dad and be like, "Snowboarding's cool," and he'd be like, "Okay, cool, yeah, like I can accept that." And he ended up moving on to like Bear Mountain, so like he knew that snowboarding was going to be good for the industry, and he didn't shut it down. Could you imagine Southern California without snowboarding, or being like closing it like Alta and being like, "No, you don't make the right kind of moguls." Parks came out of some. I know a lot of people like to claim that they were the first park builders, but I'm gonna like lay something out here. There's a dude named Travis Eva who worked in Southern California, and he has pictures and stories of being like the guy that got the early park cats, and he pushed the snow into place, and he was the one who was like the grooming manager that said, "This is important. this is what needs to be done. I know Mike Perillo and some of the early park builders really benefited from having a open-minded grooming manager. And so I just wanted to give a shout out to Travis Eva for being an early acceptor of enhanced terrain. You know, like he was willing to like, oh, let's build a snake run, and then you can find your little Tony Hawk gaps.
And so whether you're first or whether you're down the line, I think the advocation component, the believing in something really the believing in that something can't happen. You've termed it, I love it. It's the Imagineering goggles. You have to be able to take those off every once in a while to present, piece together, and really not get offended when somebody says no. Maybe elaborate on that for us.
Well, if you make a presentation and you're just like, this is going to be the sickest thing ever, and you get told no, it's because your Imagineering goggles weren't tuned in. You know, like you didn't make a good enough presentation and you didn't have the numbers or the vision to explain it because there was too many like dudes and fucking fuck yeahs in your presentation instead of like, hey, this is going to increase our sales by 20% on this weekend.
Yeah, that would be a much better way of saying it. I would not go down the route of, so everybody that's listening, don't present data with dudes and fuck yes.
I would like to just start out and say that I have made every mistake there is. Like I own it. Like I own being too passionate in my job or not understanding of other departments' needs or like literally like just too obstinate to actually make the few little corrections that would have turned into really incredible programs because I was just that, you know, like skate park obstinate punk fuck in a terrain park manager position. And I borrowed, begged, stole as much as I could in order to push it forward. And, you know, feel like it that hurt me because it wasn't like really all that genuine, where you're just like so focused on getting something done that it doesn't matter where the inspiration came from. There's no credit for the people that paved the way to get you there. And, you know, like I feel like I was totally guilty of just playing catch up and shortcutting and trying to get things done because other people had it.
Yeah. And you cannot use passion as an excuse for why you fucked up. If you're that passionate and you care that much, then you're going to go, yep, I'll own that. I fucked up there for sure. 100%. I will not back down from my wrongdoing there. But it can be such a double-edged sword. If you don't manage that emotion correctly, you can quickly find yourself in a position where you're having to backpedal, cover up shit, fix things, mend relationships, all because you're just emotionally excited to do a job. Now, don't get me wrong, like passion is definitely a part of how you can succeed, but I think your point's really good. I know I ranted there for just a second, but admitting your failures first is super important, just so that's how you can move on. I think too quickly, well, however long it's going to take you, but I want to know how you got started. I want to know where you got in the machine, how you got interested in that. Maybe go there for us. Talk about that.
Okay, we didn't talk about this, but my first experience with the machine was actually in Jackson Hole. And it came in the form of a phone call at 2:30 in the morning. And my hero, Renyon Diarge, who you might all kind of heard about, is the kind of the construction mastermind behind the recent natural selection. But he called me at 2:30 in the morning and he's like, hey, I'm building a snake run, snowboard cross. Do you want to come up and help me out? Literally called me at 2:30, woke me up, and I walked up Snow King, and he was stuck. He was stuck on a turn, and we had to dig the cat out.
No way. Oh my God.
He was like high centered on a berm.
Wow. So it was more or less just like, hey, I need you right now. You should come up and check this out. I don't know what you're doing. It's super early in the morning. It's like 2 or 3, something like that. Coming. Oh yeah. By the way, we got to
2:30 in the
dig out.
morning.
Yeah,
Hey,
yeah.
you want to come up? I'm in the cat. And I just thought that was the coolest thing ever. Like, he was so good at operating the machine already for what he had. Like, he was driving like an old 3700 D handled LMC. And I don't know if that was the vehicle, but you know, it was one of those things where you're just like so outgunned and for what you were trying to do, and the joy of creating an event for the local snowboard shop, skateboard shop. We just like we never slept. Like, we built this whole thing, and he inspired me. He was just like, I know you've built pipes and jumps at summer camp, and you need to come up and help me out and figure this out. And that turned into like an amazing story. I mean, like, just being thrown the keys, and I think a lot of people can kind of understand, like, if you can catch the keys, you can groom type of start to it. I mean, it's just so not productive. It's so nobody showed you how to turn or clean up your turnarounds or anything like that. Like, we were flailing. We were totally flailing, but we totally overcame it with sheer joy and stoke for what we were building.
Yeah, that's the best way to put it. I think flailing. You know, a lot of people that I've talked to on the show have definitely had either experience in alpine, flat tracking, mainline, fleet grooming, whatever you want to call it. And you didn't have any of that. It was just here you go.
Come get it at midnight.
Okay, yeah. Crazy man.
Remember?
Yeah. Was there ever any kind of initial training with equipment elsewhere, whether it was dirt or kind of excavation, dozer, whatever that looked like? If it was around the Aspen area or somewhere else, was there exposure to
I don't know.
that?
Like, people talk about their first job, like setting them off on their career path. And my first job was mowing a aircraft landing strip for an ultralight with like a push mower that had like rear wheel drive wheels, and in basically a horse pasture. And so I would mow this runway, and by the time I got it wide enough, the grass had grown on the other side, and I have to start over. And so I started out with like that mowing the lawn. I like, this is normal, like, type of deal. I was 14 and I was pushing a mower like literally quarter of a mile, and then turning around and mowing back to where I started. And that was, that was just part of the farm and ranch. I don't know. I grew up outside, and it was one of those things where machines to me were a treat. It was such a treat to get to ride the three wheeler between the irrigation gates. And of course, I ruined it. I crashed it, hit fence posts, and rolled it down hills, and uh, like, brought it back with the broken pieces on it, and the farmers would just be like, "You fix it," and so I'd have to, like, I literally, out of sheer terror, had to educate myself on how to fix the brake cable on a Yamaha three wheeler, or change tires or whatever it was that I'd screwed up. So, like, I grew up with like a guilt of breaking stuff.
Yeah, and the other side of that story too is that, so with you growing up around the opportunity to be around equipment, whatever it was, and then two, the professional rider that you were too, like you're being paid to snowboard, but you were also around some pretty amazing other snowboarders too, some profound people that definitely had an impact on the industry back then. But if you were to, I want to know too, if you were to describe your career pro snowboarding career in one word, what would that be? And then maybe expand on that and let us in on that story.
I was a lemming. I got paid. I got paid to jump off of shit, and I got paid. It was cool. Like, that's a whole nother story of how I ended up being paid to snowboard, but I rode for Nectar Snowboards out of Southern California. And then I rode for Moro for 2 weeks. Yeah, they were awesome. Like I still have like some like fond memories of how good those boards work, but they just would break. And they'd stop, like cut me off. They're like, no, sorry, man, you break too many boards. And I really wasn't trying to. I wasn't like bashing them on things or anything. They just like riding and they would just like snap between my feet. But I ended up I ended up having a pretty cool career because I was really infatuated with riding half pipe. That was where careers were made in like the early 90s. Snowboarding gave me the world. Like it literally paid for me to have first descents in Alaska, to go to Russia and heli ski, to ski all over Europe. And I say ski, I mean snowboard, but fuck it. Ski is ski. And to meet my heroes and to literally just soak it in and chase the POW.
Okay, JP, before we get too far along in this, I definitely want to jump into the push road question of the day. So let's roll that intro.
The push road question of the day.
Yep, and so JP, you ready or not? I'm going to play it for you now, and it's from Eric Rosenwald.
Over your career, you've done so many interesting things in the snow sports industry. But I think the craziest, fascinating thing you've done was working for the railroads on Donner Summit that one year. What was the sketchiest, gnarliest, hairball situation you saw that winter? Because I saw some pictures, and it was nuts.
Rosie. I fucking love Eric Rosenwald.
Amazing dude. Miss that guy. Eric, if you're tuned in right now, I hope you are at least just relaxing. Miss you, man. Hope all is well. What do you think, JP?
It was just good to hear his voice. I am one of like a handful of people that have gone through railroad training. And for the past 40 years, Donner Summit has cleared snow from the railroad track right away with bulldozers. And this guy, Matt Saley, from my time at Squaw Valley, has convinced them that a 8 or 9 mile an hour snowcat is a more efficient system than a 2 mile an hour snowcat. So, anyways, there's about 26 miles of track on Donner Summit, which is one of the biggest, heaviest snow areas. The year that I worked there, it was an 800-inch winter, and we'd actually waited 2 years to get a chance to like drive a cat near the railways, which are pretty much the most stressful job I've ever had in my life, because the freight trains come up and down Donner Summit, and when those trains don't run, the Union Pacific loses $1 million a day in profit. Plus, when the Amtrak doesn't run, they lose like $25 million a month in stipends from the government. So that pass has to be open. And Matt Saley figured out that if he got a 600 and pushed snow, he could basically open the doors to a new business for a guy who was just he was like the special projects guy at Squaw. And he hired me, and we had to go through all the Union Pacific training down in Sacramento, and it was eye-opening to railroad safety, because the Amtrak trains travel at 45 miles an hour over Donner Summit, which is a pretty big climb and a pretty big descent. And they can sneak up on you pretty quick. So when we first started, we had a rail yard, like switchman, sitting shotgun. And he would be in cellular, radio, and internet connectivity with the dispatch back in North Dakota, or wherever the hell they were, like Union Pacific. Dispatch was watching the rails over Donner Summit from like Nebraska or like North Dakota or something like that, and they could tell those tracks are like electrically charged. They could tell that if you connected with the track, that you fouled the track, and it would stop all trains across like the Midwest. It was a big deal, and it was if you literally touched it with your grouser, and it was a hot track, you could emergency stop trains like literally from like Denver to Davis, California, or like all the way to the port city. And we had no idea what we're doing, other than that we love to hog snow. And the snowcats, just with the ability to wing snow and open a wing and just haul ass, really changed the game of snow removal on snow covered passes for railways. I mean, we ended up clearing a rail yard that had 16 sideways on it. Like you have the two tracks going north and south, and then like all these different parking lots for trains. And we were able to clear 3 feet of snow off of the rails in 2 days in this rail yard. And the funny thing was they had sent a plow train down from like Oregon, and by the time the plow train got there, we'd done the job in 16 hours. I mean, like, and sending that train down took 24 hours just to get there. So the railroad was like, this is incredible. We've never seen anything like this. They actually hired somebody to like do a live drone feed of us working on Donner Summit so they could actually see what we were doing. Because every time the train goes by, all the bulldozers that they had used in the past, and they would have like between 5 and 15 yellow iron D8, like D6 to D8 bulldozers pushing snow away from the track, because that's how they'd done it for 40 years. And between me and Matt and the Snowcats, we were able to do like something like 16 miles of track with 2 vehicles, and it became a war. Like the bulldozer dudes hated us. They hated us. They were
I was gonna say they probably hated you, man.
40 years
Yeah.
of like, and those guys were on like such a gravy train. Like they were like, start the clock. They would punch in Sacramento and drive all the way up to Summit, like the Donner Summit, and then warm up their machines and fuel them up, and like they'd get like 3 hours of work done a day. And we would start at like 6:30 in the morning and work 12-hour days. And we were between the 2 vehicles, we had like an old Bison and a Detroit diesel 300 piston bully. And we were able to like clear more track in a day and move faster. Plus, we were like showing these guys up. You know, like every time a train came by, the law was you had to be 19 feet from the rail, and we could keep moving. But those guys were so big that they had to like back all the way up and drive onto the line and set their dozer blade down, and they could move a lot of snow, but they just couldn't keep moving while the trains were going by. So we would listen to the radio chatter, which was coming in like from the dispatch in Union Pacific headquarters, and we knew when to like get out of the way. And it was, I mean, I think that Eric asked what the most terrifying point was going through the tunnels, driving our cats on the rails, like literally like grousers on steel, and the tunnels are 17 feet wide. So if you know your cat, you know what the closed wing width is. And they're like blasted tunnels. They're not like smooth concrete, and they're curved, and they have ice humps in them. I think the second gnarliest part of it was crossing all of the bridges, because basically the Union Pacific was like, when you need to drive on the tracks, you drive on the tracks. So grousers, if you break a grouser, it doesn't matter. Just bill us for it. And I think I broke like 300 grousers that winter. $1 million a day profit versus 300 grousers. Like I was snapping grousers because you're driving on the railroad tracks and literally crossing bridges with like 200-foot followays and no handrails or anything. And I mean, Donner Summit it's a really, really busy rail line because all of the port city of like San Francisco, Davis, everything that took port and put it on the rail had to go through Donner Summit. And so those trains were everywhere. They were, I mean, it was like amazing to watch the plow trains. They have like a 23-foot wing that stick out the side, and the rams on it are like 16 inches in diameter, and it's like pushing Sierra cement. But all of a sudden this train goes by and pushes a 12, 15-foot windrow because the engines weigh like 800,000 pounds. I mean, it was one day when this train came out of the tunnel at Sugar Bowl and literally high centered the engines. The engines weigh 800,000 pounds each, have 16-inch pistons, diesel powered, and they high centered the train.
No way.
You know how you fix that?
No idea how.
You just crawl underneath with shovels and dig it out.
Oh man. Yeah, I wouldn't have thought that. So I think we stay on this topic for a little bit, but just high stress level, crazy job. Like if you don't know what you're doing, you're screwed.
I mean, when you're not listening to radio chatter and you're not used to the radio, you would probably get hit by a train. But if you've been at a resort and you're able to tune it out but hear what's going on, is a huge part of that job. I mean, that job paid so well. Like I got like danger pay. It was like so union. It was like snow time pay and 8 hours a day and then double time, triple time. And
I was gonna say, how much does a job like that pay? I'd want to know. Only because you're high risk and you're just doing what you can do based on the knowledge you got, but you're still learning a new craft, kind of a process. But it's got to be more than the $16 an hour at ski resort.
$56 an hour.
Holy shit, man. Like you wouldn't even need to work during the summer, I don't think.
12 hours a day, 7 days a week, dodging trains. We started making our own roads with the cat. And then we could just like, the line never needed to be fouled by a snowcat going through the tunnel. And the train people thought that was amazing. They were just like, oh, we don't have to slow down for 15 bulldozers to drive through. Like they drive bulldozers right on the tracks because an engine weighs 800,000 pounds. A dozer isn't going to do shit to the rails. I mean, that winter was so big. It was the year they brought out the rotary plow for the first time in like 12 years. The thing sat in mothballs, and that rotary plow was amazing. It had like this 14-foot wide mouth it was all steam train. and it would like self-clean the rotary with steam, but then it would shoot like a snowblower like 300 feet in the air. So it's like self-cleaning and snow eating snowblower that you've never seen before in your life. Like it literally, like I got to this point where the thing had to go by me and I didn't know what to do because I couldn't like hide from it. And I just had to let the thing throw snow on me. And I was worried it was going to break all my windows. So I like positioned the cat like at an angle I thought would like take the least amount of like snow damage. And somehow none of my windows got broke. But that winter was insane.
What a story. Wow. Thank you, Eric, for asking that question. Big shout out to you, man. And JP, thanks for letting us in on that. Wow. That was an incredible story, dude. That was awesome. Thanks for sharing. And I think real quick, and it doesn't have to be real quick, I guess, but let's talk about what your maybe version of success would be outside of the ski area operating a snowcat. Because it's not like a snowcat is single faceted. There's so many different applications that you can put that machine into and have it do exactly what it's supposed to do. Move material, manage material, take care of a product offering, or mitigate something. Either way, it's a useful piece of equipment. So I'd be interested to know kind of like your take on maybe two things. The general stoke of obviously the joy of obviously operating that equipment, and then maybe how it can be successful operating outside the ski area.
I do that a lot. Like it's overwhelming to think about how much joy operating a machine can bring, because 90% of the operators out there in the world don't have the fulfillment that we do in a machine. Like literally like sunset, sunrise, deep pow, tight tree runs, fog, like all these things just never happen with most operators. And I think the best way to describe it was when the operators union out of Reno came up to Donner Summit in Boreal to try and get the cat drivers into the union and unionize cat drivers like back in the early 90s. And they rode around with my hero, my true, like, I think my favorite person to say that taught me the most was this guy named Johnny Auger, who created Jurassic Park. And this union representative rode around with this guy with a 10-way blade and literally went, okay, there's nothing we can do here. What you guys are doing is far more complex than anything we can quantitate and include in our operators union. And so there's a pride in being in that machine that should be your own. And it should be a job well done and a run finished efficiently and ultimately, like fun. It's not about how flat you make it, because some runs don't need to be flat. And it's not about how fast you do it, because you leave shitty grooming, or also doesn't matter about how much snow you move, because you're spending too much diesel. And so finding that real pride in being a professional is this never-ending pursuit that takes years to become an operator instead of a driver. Like when you're an operator, it's like you're concerned about fuel consumption, you're concerned about machine wear, you're concerned about product, you're concerned about fun. Like that's what we're ultimately trying to do, is like make it fun for people to ski and then make it consistent.
Yeah, because the number one thing that you're concerned about when you're out there is the surface. You're taking care of and you're managing the number one product offering that is out there for everybody to enjoy. So when that's happening, there's got to be some level of pride, of stoke, accountability that's happening there. And so, yeah, I agree. Like you're not only paying attention to one thing, you're paying attention to several things. So
It's just pride in your product. Like
yeah,
and whether, like Brandon talked about the smallest features. And I had a big battle with that in parks. I actually really kind of keyed into that thing. And Burton Snowboards paid for me to fly to Japan to teach resorts how to build learn to ride terrain. Because that small feature is basically impossible to see out of the cat. You got a 22-foot long machine trying to build 8-foot rollers. It's like, how do I do this with this big square machine and build all these little snake runs and things like that? Brandon was dead on when he talked about putting your best operator on those little features because it takes the greatest amount of skill. And anybody that feels like they're being demeaned by saying, hey, can you go do the Panda Peak? Can you go do the Eagles Rest or the junior slope? It's like, that should be a badge of honor because you're actually more skilled than their average person.
okay, so let's talk about that. You were literally given opportunities. I mean, you were whether it's you view it as timing or being in the right place, whatever it was, you were definitely given opportunities, kind of along the lines of what you were just talking about with that badge of honor. You should be excited to do something like that. You've accomplished things in your career, like there are definitely the job titles, the manager position at Jackson Hole, Squaw Valley. I think that those are key, probably development components for you. But because you mentioned your failures and kind of messing up a lot along the way, what was maybe the one component of either building foundation or construction of anything snow-wise that was the beginning for you?
Hand digging half pipes. That was like pure joy. 20 dudes hand digging a pipe in a day. Like Snowcat would come in and box you a trench and you had to make it into a half pipe. And that was like the most sunburned and dehydrated and happy work ever. But it all grew. Like it grew year after year, like summer camps, High Cascade. I worked at High Cascade and I worked my way up from like begging digger at Camp of Champions in Whistler when there was like the Camp of Champions and the Craig Kelly camp right next to each other to being the assistant camp manager at Camp of Champions. So like, I have always wanted to be a part of the success of an operation. I wanted to see it thrive because it goes back to what I started with being like, I wanted the recognition of progression, profitability, and popularity, and I like.
Should we just call those the 3 Ps or P cubed, however you want to term it? Man, those are pretty big ones.
Okay, but here's the deal. Like my biggest dream was to work for SPT and those guys. And it took me 10 years to realize that I was the problem. Like I wanted nothing more to be like a SPT crew dude. Like I thought they were the raddest. And I was just like, that is the epitome of what we're doing. But what I realized was I never fit in because I was such a kook. Like I was like the guy that was willing to beg, borrow, and steal all of their secret ideas to make myself better or my product better. And they all saw it and I didn't. I had no clue. I had no fucking idea that I was such a kook because I was just this dude who was like running on Overstoke and willing to like completely copy totally proprietary systems for my own benefit. And then I realized, I was like, wait a minute, I'm like the just the lamest dude out there. Like I had to like look back and look at myself and take onus for not really having any original ideas, because I was constantly copying what the people that I looked up to were doing. And that's the honest truth. Is like there was no way I was going to be an SBT guy, because I wasn't trustworthy. I wasn't dedicated. I wasn't one of them. I was just a guy that was like so stoked to have a little bit of everything that I really didn't have a plan. So working at all those resorts, I was constantly trying to reinvent the wheel instead of following what needed to be done. And that completely led to my eventual like complete implosion from working 18-hour days for 10 plus years, 15 years. Like 15 years into building, I was done. I was so cooked.
Were you obsessed with just being in control? Was it kind of like a micromanaging component where you weren't really investing in your team? Did you always have to kind of have your thumb on things, a pulse on things? Maybe you were backseat driving. I don't know, but I mean, I can understand kind of where you're coming from just from the stories you're telling. But maybe unpack that.
I think it was a little bit of both. Like I had this insatiable ego for, oh, we got this contest or this photo shoot, or we were able to pull off this event. But really what it came down to was I wanted my crews to really like learn to work and have that same fire. And like it worked. I have, to this day, I have friendships of people who are out of the industry and have moved away all over the country who are like, hey man, thanks. You taught me how to work. And I appreciate that because I'm successful in what I'm doing now. And that's pretty cool. But, like I really had like a mixture of ego, major like asshole ego, unbendable will, and the obsessive compulsiveness of like the small town kid trying to prove himself, that eventually led to me just like completely imploding, because you can't burn the candle at both ends for that long without like you can't. Like there are people who try with chemicals, and there are people that try different ways to remain on top, whether it's becoming really ruthless in their business endeavors or really like weirdo drug addict meth heads, or they just burn out and leave. They're just like, I'm done. I've done it. My passion has burned it thin, and I'm out. I don't have any more. Dave Franzen and Jay Ridd at King Bell were huge influences because they had like the mechanical and the marketing and the skill and the savvy. Like they were just like oozing with style. And like Ryan Neptune with Planet Snow Tools, he made rakes and rails that were amazing. Like I wanted that. Like I wanted to know what the plastic, what do you call the plastic that you put on your rails? Like I was always inspired by the people that I met along the way. And I would keep going. I mean, Jackson Hole, they threw me the keys to BR 2000 and they were like, take it out for a rip. We got the demo here. And my lead mechanic was Jeb Ellermeyer, who works for Piston Bully now. And And it's like, do you know how to drive that thing? I'm like, nope. How do you turn it on? You know, it's just like so many of those things, so many of those like experiences going to Mount Hood and watching Jeff Flood push like 16 to 20 blade stacks of wet snow downhill with a 350 ME. And like, what's an ME? Like, it was 2 sticks between your legs, and it was the gnarliest pushing cat ever. Like, Jeff Flood got it, you know, and Steve Cruz, the mountain manager, was willing to buy him and custom make a cat to push features into place on the glacier. You know, Logan Stewart teaching me how to drive around in the fog, the operations manager at Hood. I mean, I'm just like so thankful for the people that I got to hang with. I mean, in all honesty, it was like just flailing around blindly going, what do you guys do? What do you guys do? And it was obvious that I was really trying too hard, but I learned so much. I learned so much from those people, and I was just insatiable. Like, every time I got to sit in the passenger seat, I took it. And if you're like, honestly, the one dude I never got to ever see move a cat was Elliot Cohn. Like, that guy did shit with a snowcat, beef. Like, just I saw the final results. I mean, I went to Super Park and Keystone and just went, who built that? I'd be like, Elliot built that. And I'd be like, I have no idea how he even did that. Like, that is a piece of that is insane. Like, amazing. I mean, going way back, like Johnny Auger building Jurassic Park at Boreal single-handedly, and then having the best stories ever of being like one of the most rock star park builders ever, because he was sponsored by the strip clubs in Reno. And like, the strippers would drive up to Boreal and ride around with him half naked in his cat. Well, probably fully naked. Anyways, that's the PG story of Johnny Auger.
I do think it's, yeah, man. I mean, those are some crazy stories, but at the same token, like, I do think it's great that you're willing to acknowledge the fact that you didn't have it all together. You know, you had to piece it back together after you fucked up, trying to be somebody you weren't. And you realized that. And so you were able to kind of treasure the relationships that you made. You looked up to the people that you met, and you took some advice away from all that. I mean, that's huge. That's really big. But one of the, you mentioned Hood. One of the things that I'm just trying to I'm always down to talk about Mount Hood, but what was one of the biggest things that you took away from working at Mount Hood? It could be anything or anybody that you were around. I know you dropped a few names, but what was that?
Patience. Really, I mean, you're dealing with like this snowpack that is so condensed, and it's like the purest form of snowmaking snow. But you're also running in these ravines where if you get out of line, you're just like right into the rocks, and your whole park could melt out, and the middle of summer camp is ruined because you didn't have the right line. And they have done an amazing job of GPSing and pushing the electronic systems in cats for knowing your whereabouts and your snow depth, that everybody kind of freaked out when it first came out. They're like, well, Big Brother's going to know that I'm taking a 2-hour nap on my grooming shift, you know? And it's like, that's not the point. The point was, it was built to be a tool, and then the conspiracy theorists took over, or the fucking lazy bastards that were taking a 2-hour, 3-hour nap on their shift instead of working the day through. Like, I don't know a park guy that takes a nap. Like, I don't, because there's never enough time in the day. And so being at Mount Hood, you're learning to manipulate snow. You're building bridges. You're stacking snow efficiently and really symmetrically, because the melt freeze there will show your shortcuts. Like if you don't pack enough snow into the sunny side of a rail, the thing will fall over by 3:00 in the afternoon.
Yeah, well, I want to know too, just because dude, I'm always up for talking about Mountain Hood because there's so much history there, and you had the opportunity to work there, be around some pretty profound individuals that were making impacts. I want to know if you got a good flat-out story, because that man was definitely revolutionary when it came to not only advocating for the education component, but advocating for just what the future of park programs and features would be.
He was the grooming manager that like realized how much of an impact summer freestyle terrain could make for the mountain, because they were at that point they were so reliant on ski clubs coming to run gates on the upper Palmer that they had all this extra terrain down below that was kind of flat and boundaried by rock ravines. And he really helped push freestyle terrain by being like, yeah, we need to make a 70-foot jump because nobody else can at their resort. Like, yeah, I mean, like he would push all the snow out of the half pipe and then have this giant mound at the bottom of the half pipe, which made a nice place to like stop and take your bindings off. But then all of a sudden they realized that they had just built a landing for a 100-foot kicker.
All right, based on that realization comment, I'm going to pivot here, JP. I got a question from Trevor Borelli, and it's kind of along that realization terminology you used there, but I think it's great. It's, if you were to build a park grooming department, what 5 operators would you want and why? And I think it's along the lines of either names or personality types. I think you could take that either way. So however you want to unwrap that for us, that would be awesome. And thanks, Trevor, for the question, man.
Well, like immediately I just come up with 5. Like I'm like, you have the builder, and then number 2 is the finisher. Number 3 would be the documenter. Number 4 would be the devil's advocate. And number 5 would be the rookie. And I can kind of expand on that because I wrote an article about it in Sam Ski Area Management magazine on the 7 personalities of a park crew. And many of those are the same, but it's like you have to have the person with the vision for the park. And it doesn't have to be entirely the park manager, and it shouldn't be. Like the park manager is the manager, but if you don't give ownership to the builders and make them actually honestly present you with a plan, then you're going to wake up with a 70-foot jump in the parking lot on Saturday morning, and the GM is going to freak out. So if it's not pre-planned and vetted and run by, maybe even the veteran is like the devil's advocate, like he's like, oh, we built that jump there and everybody ends up sliding into the trees. Great idea, wrong place. Great shape, love it. Everybody ends up sliding into the trees in the spring. Like just save it for another place. You've got to have the rookie because they won't ever learn and progress. And they won't see it being done. You got to have the, like the perfectionist who will be like, yeah, cool, but all your jumps are out of line. Like you can't ski from jump 1 to jump 2 without making a big turn, which is going to turn into braking bumps and ruin the flow of these features because the first one's too big. Like tone it down and make the second one bigger. Like there's a definite balance of like the full on guy who's just frothing to build the most incredible features you've ever seen, to the rookie who is just like, how the hell did you stack the snow that high? And how did you not like dig it down to dirt in the in run in the process. Because that's what happens when you have these guys who are like the builders. They're just like, they steal snow from wherever's closest and they ruin the longevity of the park. Having those personalities in the cats as well as on your crew is, that's part of customer service. You're building something for the lowest common denominator, but you're also trying to build something that is fun. And it's not necessarily the biggest feature, but it's also comes down to creativity and flow and usability of those features. So that's a tough question. Like, how do you hire for that?
Yeah, see, now we're blade diving, man. Now we're deep blade diving. All right, let's switch gears and pivot again and go back to like the second half of that possibility of an answer. Who would your top 5 people be? Who, or maybe even 5 people? It doesn't even have to be the top 5 operators in the world. Just who would your 5 people be?
Like the king of name dropping, and now I'm drawing a blank. But you know what?
No, it's well, how about this? Just pick one. Pick one person. Just pick one person instead of 5. Let's just pick one individual you would want on your team.
I enjoy having a little bit of a maverick in the mix because they push the boundaries. So Charles Beckinsale is the maverick, and he knows what it's like to be like the fucking brunt of the worst possible situation, which is having the mechanics think that they are purposely destroying machines. So, Charles had an experience at Squaw where he drove a cat from its parking spot into the mechanics. Like, he checked it out and he was like, "Hey, something's wrong with this," and they immediately blamed him for the 7 cracks in the frame that they found on like a 18,000 hour cat. And like Charles, like, he literally, like, he got blamed for ruining a cat and it had nothing to do with him.
All right, so along the lines of that blame, claim, and shame piece you were talking about, what type of leadership and vulnerability components does a manager have to have in order to see a successful team building experience for the department? What do you think that looks like?
I call it the triangles, and they're it's the strongest form, right? So I think that there needs to be, from a manager, there needs to be clear communication of what was going on or what needs to be done. And then from the employee worker side, there needs to be a clear explanation of what their intention was. And then there needs to be an agreement on the third leg of the triangle of what the result was. And that way you can build this conversation in any of those directions, and you can start on any side of that triangle and be like, "I gave you a job. What was your intention? Here's the results." Or you can say, "Here's the results. What was your intention? What was the job I gave you?" Or you can say, "What were you setting out to do? This is what you built, but what did I tell you to do?" And once you do that consistently, you take a lot of the emotion out of hurting people's good intentions.
Yeah, I think I like that. I don't know that people's intentions are always good, but I do know that even if they are bad, they can be circumvented, navigated just solely based on communication,
Well, it simplifies it, and it's kind of like it's a way for conflict avoidance in your communication if you're consistent with it, where you're like, "Here's the job, here are the boundaries, and here's the goal." And that's communication from the manager. Like, you need to be clear in what needs to be done. Giving the worker the ownership to get that done should be fully autonomous. Like, am I going to start building this thing from the bottom because all the snow has been pushed downhill for the last 2 months? that's their decision, because they should be paying attention to where the snow is. They should have the intention of completing your communication with good results. You may have thought, oh, they're just going to push downhill all night and it'll be done in 2 hours. And they're like, no, all of the snow is down below that feature. If you want that feature built, it's going to take twice as long, because I'm going to have to winch it up, or I'm going to have to push it up and teaspoon it into place. But once people start talking that way, it takes out of those butthurt feelings of like being called out in front of people for bad results. You know?
Yeah, I'm picking up what you're putting down, man, for sure. Maybe let's get past like the intention, and maybe that you've got that dialed, and maybe you've got a tenured individual or somebody that's interested for the first time. But how do you maintain a career, a positive, impactful career in the ski industry, snow industry, rather?
Maintaining your career is by setting boundaries on what you're willing to do, and finding a place that will accept that. Because I think I was talking about like the ski industry is a sprint that is a year-round business, but really only has a short window to make money. So they'll burn you out if you aren't well planned or willing to say no. And that longevity comes from pre-planning, being articulate and documenting. A winter season is hard on everybody, mentally and physically. And the funny thing is like the guys at Mount Hood go 10 months out of the year like that. Like there's no break. And so you got to learn to pace yourself. And the only way to pace it is to plan it. And so that everybody knows on the crew, hey, like I said before, like don't spend all your money at the bar and then wonder April 1st why you don't have a job, or
yeah, totally,
why you don't have any money saved up, or you can't make it into June when your next seasonal job starts. Like plan ahead and communicate that with people.
You know, this is something that we haven't really covered on the show. I think that so it doesn't matter if you're a groomer, if you're in the fleet or you're in the park, but a job in general, and how much ever you put into it is what you'll get out of it for sure. But if you're not putting enough credits into the life column and you're debiting so many things from just the job, and the job really becomes what you're consuming. I have been there, just riding along in the machine, whether I'm doing that or whether I'm just working crazy hours. I remember there was actually a quick story. There was a shift where Alex Storjahan and I literally fucking worked 24 hours to make sure that Sammy Carlson's wall was done. And then the next week after that, we had Super Park. I mean, there are things that you are responsible for that you've got to commit to. I get that. But you've got to take care of yourself at the end of the day, and you've got to have a plan for what that looks like. And so you're still getting paid the same dollar amount no matter how long you work.
I call it life as a series of linked recoveries.
Damn, that's good, dude. I like that. I like that.
Like you catch an edge and then you point it and you still make the sweet spot on the next jump or whatever it is. Like you roll down the windows on the first jump and you don't think you're going to make the next one, but you waxed good. And like linked recoveries, man, you're just like, you're committed.
Yeah, it's kind of like managing the chaos, or I like to kind of put it as, you're making music out of the noise that life provides sometimes, drowning out the negativity. I know that's maybe glass half empty perspective with whether or not there may be noise coming your way, but at any rate, you're definitely dealing with challenges, and I think that they can be hard sometimes, and especially if you're maybe overcommitted into a job and you're not really putting back, like I mentioned, anything into the life column of checks and balances. But I want to know, JP, maybe when a deep blade dive in life maybe happened to you, and you kind of had to figure out a way to get back in it and either find the love for and the passion for the industry that you once had that was real and organic, or if you weren't able to really get out of that at all, and you kind of had to figure out what getting out and back to grade looked like.
those, those are like the hardest fixes. It's usually springtime. I'll say that, and it's because you're tired. And for me, it was managing 3 shifts. Like you got the day, swing, and grave, and I was so obsessed with the overall production that I would be there from like 5:30 in the morning till 1 in the morning.
Yeah, that's heavy. That's a long one, man.
Right, and it's like you go in at 5:30 in the morning, and you get a snowmobile, and you drive up to the park, and you go jump in a cat with the graveyard boys, girls that are trying to get the park open for public, and you're just like downloading their night and then transferring that to the day crew. Hey guys, we got a really big turn rut that we got to rake out, or like it's really hard to balance. And working those like 18-hour days consistently for 15 years, I ended up like completely imploding, like literally to the point where I was incapable to do my summer job and didn't know if I was going to go back for another winter. Like hated it. I hated it. I was like, it's like so unthankful, and nobody's paying attention to us, and all of a sudden you just get into this victim thing, and instead of being thankful for what you have and what you've accomplished, you get stuck on, oh, I got to go back and do it all over again. And I actually, like, that crushed me. That broke my spirit as a park builder after letting myself be so disorganized that I wasn't able to like work a 8 or 10 hour or 12-hour day. That it was like a mental breakdown of the worst kind, because you're actually physically done from so many years of burning the candle at both ends, and nothing's fun anymore. Like I had 6 snowmobile. I lived in a great place to go out, and I had no interest in like free riding, taking my sled out and climbing into the backcountry. It was just like lost all of that zest for what I was doing, because I had pushed it so hard and pushed it to the point where my family was suffering, my career was suffering, my motivation, my creativity, even my attitude, my like just outward vibes were dark. Like people would just distance themselves from you, and you're like, I'm working my ass off. Like, how come you guys can't fucking respect that? And it's like, well, you're putting off this black cloud like Eeyore, and people see it coming. And I totally lived that. Like I totally went through it. And the only way for me to come out of it was to find something that I could do that I was somewhat successful at, and just go back to the basics. So I spent a winter on graveyard grooming cross country trails.
Wow, dude, I didn't know you went and did that. That's pretty cool. It had to have been difficult though.
That is like the hardest job there is. It's so hard. Like where I was grooming was like pretty fancy spot, and the trails were like a bowl of spaghetti, and putting those track setters up and down so that people weren't skiing into walls was like the new challenge in a cat. And driving through those skinny little trails, I was in a 400 piston bully, but I had 3 track setters to control and drive in a loop that would make sense for the people that were skiing. And that was like fantastic. Like that was,
Yeah, that sounds a bit reinvigorating. Yeah.
yeah, it was a release, like it was really interesting. I mean, the year that I spent working on the railroad, I also worked 3 nights a week just being a frontline groomer, flat tracker. And that was the hardest job I'd ever had. Like being a flat tracker who that winter on an 800-inch winter would have like a whole mountain to open out of 3 peaks. They would be closed Monday through Thursday, and I'd come on Friday night and they'd be like, yeah, the lift's running in the morning. You got to dig out the bottom station, top station, and rebuild all the runs. And it was all I could do to like get to the top of the chair with my tiller up and then try and like rebuild these runs in one shift, or like sometimes I'd even stay like an extra 2 or 3 hours so that side of the mountain would open. Because I mean, it was a challenge. I mean, it's finding something that inspires curiosity and wonder is the best job you can find. And when you lose that curiosity and wonder and that joy and appreciation for your product and for your accomplishment, then it's time to move on. Like go to the beach, do something less hectic, or move up. Step into where your manager can actually rely on you. And if your manager is a good manager, they're going to train you and mentor you so that they can step up. Because if they're dumb enough not to be building the foundation for them to get higher in the industry, then you're just not in a good place. Like work with people, not against people.
You know what I think's cool? I think it's cool that you were able to see that and move forward in a direction that was going to be beneficial for you and everybody else. I think that's pretty big too, to be able to talk about it. Another thing that's on my mind is the training component. I've definitely said I'd like to have access to some kind of simulator that a manufacturer has out there just to talk about it, if nothing else, because it's an interesting component. But the training component to me is doing both. Marketing and pushing things in a direction towards the digital platform, and then the hours spent behind the sticks. So what's your take?
So, 10,000 hours to do anything, you become pro. It goes by quick, but if you're not paying attention, it won't last. And if you are paying attention, if it doesn't sink in, then you're not going to progress. And if you're not progressing, then that limbo or that staleness breeds contention, and aligning yourself with people that'll allow you to be better. Like yellow iron politics, the old yellow iron politics of like, fuck the rookie, let's throw him in the fucking mud hole and see if he can get out. Like, I hate it. I hate that old school mentality of screwing the rookie. Let's lap this run and make sure the rookie's on the outside right so he drives into the wind drift and gets stuck on purpose just to make his night miserable. Like those kind of hazing and like just bullying tactics are bullshit. There's no place for it. There's no place for it.
No, there's not. And you can't build up a department by constantly breaking people down. I like to call it what's the best way to put it? Transactional relationships. There we go. When things are transactional, you're not lifting anybody up. You're literally moving on from one thing to the next. You gotta lift people up.
Oh, man, it just makes coming to work such a joy.
Yeah, it does. It does. And one of the coolest memories that I have of just being in the machine was I had two gentlemen last year, Elijah Sutton and Tyler Lincoln Goodman, who literally they understood they had minimal or zero experience, but they also they were hungry and they wanted to contribute. That's all it was. They wanted to contribute. They wanted to be a part of the team. And I thoroughly enjoyed taking them in, holding their hand and just showing them as much as I could and telling them that they had it and believing in them.
If the resorts continue to make rookies miserable, there's very few people that are willing to do it out of passion. And you got to recognize that it doesn't pay that well, but it sure is fun.
You know what? I think you could probably, yes, it doesn't pay the bills, but when you can instill confidence in people, but there's that component of negativity. Like, you got to hold people accountable to that. Be like, dude, you're fucking it up for everybody, man. Like,
and demanding that from your managers. Like, hey, the crew is actually doing pretty good, but you know what? You're detracting. Like, that's a tough one, because a lot of people are afraid to better everybody underneath them, because then they're like, oh, well, then I'm not relevant in my position. They siloize themselves instead of building a pyramid. It's like top-down management is just, we've all learned that it's not working. So bring people along.
Yes, definitely bring people along. And maybe instead of thinking that you're going to be irrelevant, you're trying to protect all your ideas, it's probably more important that you get relative with the situation, that the future's on the way. Whether you want to believe it or not, man, people need to get relative with the fact that this next generation that's coming up is the future of the ski world, snowboard world, snow industry. And we should just embrace that shit. We should encourage them. We should be positive. We should let them be themselves and figure out how we can manage their skill sets and put them in the proper situation, and so that they can have a bright future, and the future of this industry will be amazing. That's just my 2 cents. JP, I really want to say thank you so much for taking the time today to jump on the podcast and be with us. I always enjoy catching up, and I think your humble beginnings and your humble stories of how you've learned and failed and you're trying to reinvent yourself now are definitely testaments to your character and once again getting relative with the situation and trying to grow. So thank you, man.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, because it's been a hard run from being a real egotistical asshole to someone who really I'm a student of the game now. Like, I really want to push things forward in ways that it's not just me.
Okay, before we get out of here, I just want to give a huge shout out and thank you to JP Martin for coming on the podcast. I know it's a big ask, so thank you for your time, sir. If you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. It would mean a lot to me. And follow us on social media at The Blade Dive on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Make sure you're tagging us in those photos. Use the hashtag The Blade Dive. And I'm just going to go ahead and throw this out there. My favorite part of the episode was definitely the railroad bit, and snowcats go elsewhere besides ski resorts. So maybe let's keep talking about that kind of topic. Okay, you know the deal. Don't be a dick. Please fill your machine with diesel at the end of your shift.